Boston, Massachusetts. October 1889. The city was draped in the golden hues of autumn, with leaves falling like copper coins onto the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. The air carried the crispness of approaching winter, mixed with the smell of burning coal from the chimneys of elegant brownstone homes. Inside the Montgomery estate, a three-story mansion overlooking Boston Common, preparations for the wedding of the season were reaching their crescendo. Catherine Elizabeth Montgomery stood motionless in front of the full-length mirror in her dressing room, her hands clasped tightly together. She was 22 years old, with porcelain skin that had never seen a day of manual labor, dark auburn hair pinned in elaborate curls, and green eyes that once sparkled with curiosity but now seemed distant, almost hollow. The wedding dress that enveloped her was a masterpiece of silk and French lace, imported at great expense by her father, Thomas Montgomery, one of Boston's most successful textile merchants. "Hold still, Miss Catherine," said Martha, the seamstress, her mouth full of pins as she adjusted the train of the dress. Martha was a woman in her 50s, with weathered hands that told stories of decades spent serving wealthy families. She had known Catherine since she was a child, and something in the young woman's demeanor troubled her deeply. Catherine's mother, Eleanor Montgomery, circled her daughter like a hawk examining prey. Eleanor was 50 years old, impeccably dressed in a burgundy silk gown, her graying hair styled in the latest fashion. Her face, though still handsome, had the hardness of someone who had spent years maintaining appearances in Boston's elite society. "Smile, Catherine," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp as cut glass. "The photographer will be here in less than an hour, and I will not have you looking like you're attending a funeral instead of your own wedding." Catherine's lips curved upward, but the smile never reached her eyes. It was a practiced expression, one she had perfected over the past 6 months since her engagement to William Bradford Ashford III had been announced in the Boston Globe Society pages. "That's better," Eleanor said, though her tone suggested she was far from satisfied. "Remember, this marriage is not just about you. It's about securing our family's position. The Ashfords are one of the oldest families in Boston. Their shipping empire spans 3 continents. Your father and I have worked tirelessly to arrange this match." Martha glanced up at Catherine's face in the mirror and saw something that made her heart sink. In the reflection, away from Eleanor's direct view, Catherine's smile had already faded, replaced by an expression of such profound sadness that it seemed to age her 10 years. "Mrs. Montgomery," Martha ventured carefully, "perhaps Miss Catherine needs a moment to rest before the photographer arrives? She looks quite pale." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. She's simply nervous, as any bride should be. Catherine, stand up straighter. You're slouching." The dressing room was opulent, with wallpaper featuring delicate rose patterns, heavy velvet curtains blocking out the autumn light, and furniture imported from France. Yet despite its beauty, the room felt suffocating, like a gilded cage. On the vanity table sat Catherine's trousseau items, embroidered handkerchiefs with her new initials, jewelry boxes containing pieces from the Ashford family collection, and a leather-bound book of household management that Eleanor insisted she study. A knock at the door interrupted the tense silence. "Come in," Eleanor called. The door opened to reveal Catherine's younger sister, Margaret, who was 17 and possessed the same auburn hair but with a liveliness that Catherine had lost. Margaret's eyes widened when she saw her sister in the wedding dress. "Oh, Catherine, you look like a princess from a fairy tale," Margaret breathed, rushing forward. "A fairy tale," Catherine repeated softly, the irony in her voice so subtle that only Martha seemed to catch it. Margaret took her sister's hands, and Catherine noticed how cold they were despite the warmth of the room. "Are you excited? In 3 days, you'll be Mrs. William Ashford. Everyone in Boston is talking about how perfect you two are together." Catherine's throat tightened. Perfect. That word had been used to describe her engagement countless times. The perfect match. The perfect bride. The perfect future. But perfection, she had learned, was often just another word for prison. "Margaret, please don't wrinkle her dress," Eleanor scolded. "And Catherine, we need to discuss the receiving line for the wedding breakfast. The Cabots will be there, as well as the Lodges. You must remember to greet each family in order of importance. I've prepared a list." As Eleanor droned on about social hierarchies and proper etiquette, Catherine's mind drifted to 6 months earlier, to the spring evening when her father had called her into his study and informed her, not asked her, that she would be marrying William Ashford. There had been no discussion, no consideration of her feelings. Her father had presented it as a business arrangement, which in essence, it was. The Montgomerys have money, but the Ashfords have pedigree, her father had said, lighting his pipe with the satisfied air of a man closing a profitable deal. This marriage will elevate our family. Your children will have access to society that even your mother and I cannot fully enter. You should be grateful, Catherine. Grateful. Another word that had been weaponized against her. She had met William only 3 times before their engagement was formally announced. He was 35 years old, 13 years her senior, with thinning blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and the soft physique of a man who had never done physical labor. He was educated, polite in public, and came with the weight of family expectations that matched her own. But it was during their second meeting at a dinner party at the Ashford estate in Cambridge that Catherine had witnessed something that chilled her blood. One of the servants, a young woman about Catherine's age, had accidentally spilled wine near William's chair. The change in his demeanor had been instantaneous and terrifying. His face had darkened, his voice had dropped to a menacing whisper, and though Catherine couldn't hear what he said to the servant, she saw the girl's face drain of color and her hands begin to shake. Later, when Catherine had discreetly asked another servant about the incident, the woman had gone pale and quickly changed the subject. But the fear in her eyes had told Catherine everything she needed to know. She had tried to speak to her father about her concerns, but he had dismissed them immediately. "You're being hysterical, Catherine. William Ashford is a gentleman from one of Boston's finest families. Whatever you think you saw was surely a misunderstanding. Women often have nervous imaginings before marriage. It's natural." Her mother had been even less sympathetic. "Every woman has doubts before marriage," Eleanor had said coldly. "Marriage is not about romance, Catherine. It's about duty, family, and securing one's future. You will marry William Ashford, and you will be grateful for the opportunity." Catherine had felt the trap closing around her with each passing day. She had no skills to support herself, no legal right to property, and no way to escape the future that had been chosen for her. In 1889 Boston, a woman of her class had exactly one path: marriage to a suitable man selected by her family. "Catherine!" Her mother's sharp voice snapped her back to the present. "Are you listening to me?" "Yes, mother. I apologize." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You seem distracted. Is something troubling you?" For a moment, Catherine considered telling the truth. About her fears regarding William's temper. About the nightmares she had been having. About the way her chest tightened every time she thought about her wedding night. About spending the rest of her life with a man she barely knew and increasingly feared. But she looked at her mother's hard eyes and knew it would be pointless. Eleanor Montgomery had made her own pragmatic marriage 30 years ago and expected her daughter to do the same without complaint. "No, mother. I'm simply tired from all the preparations." "Well, you can rest after the wedding," Eleanor said. "Now, the photographer is here. Come downstairs to the parlor. We'll take the formal portrait with the mirror that your father purchased specifically for this occasion." As they descended the grand staircase, Catherine caught sight of her father in his study, meeting with his business associates. Thomas Montgomery was a robust man of 55, with Matanchop sideburns and the confident bearing of someone who had built his fortune through shrewd investments and ruthless negotiation. He glanced up as they passed, gave Catherine a brief nod of approval at her appearance, and returned to his conversation about textile imports. The parlor had been transformed into a photographer's studio. Heavy curtains had been drawn back to allow in the pale October light. In the center of the room stood an ornate full-length mirror in a gilded frame, positioned at an angle to capture both Catherine and her reflection. The photographer, a thin man named Mr. Harrison with spectacles and nervous hands, was adjusting his large camera on its tripod. "Ah, Miss Montgomery," he said, bowing slightly. "You look absolutely radiant. This will be a portrait for the ages." Eleanor positioned Catherine in front of the mirror, adjusting the angle of her shoulders, the drape of her dress, the tilt of her head. "Remember to smile," she whispered. "Think of your future as Mrs. Ashford." The thought made Catherine want to weep, but she forced her face into the expression expected of a happy bride. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a beautiful young woman in an exquisite dress, smiling as society demanded. But if anyone looked closely at the reflection, they might notice what Martha had seen earlier: the sadness in the eyes, the tension in the shoulders, the barely perceptible tremor in the hands. "Perfect," Mr. Harrison said, disappearing beneath the camera's black cloth. "Hold that pose. Don't move. 3, 2. The flash powder exploded with a burst of light and smoke. Catherine remained frozen in position, her smile fixed, her reflection captured for eternity in silver and light. A perfect bride. A perfect lie. As Mr. Harrison began packing his equipment, promising the portraits would be ready in 2 weeks, Catherine continued to stare at the mirror. In its surface, she could see not just her own reflection but the reflection of her entire life. Beautiful, polished, and completely beyond her control. "Excellent," Eleanor said, satisfied. "Now, we have final fittings for the bridesmaids' dresses, meetings with the florist and the caterer. Catherine, go upstairs and rest for 30 minutes. You look exhausted." Catherine climbed the stairs slowly, her heavy wedding dress making each step an effort. When she reached her bedroom, the room she had slept in since childhood, she closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing the smile to fall from her face. The room was filled with memories: the dollhouse in the corner that her father had brought from Germany, the bookshelf filled with novels she was no longer allowed time to read, the window seat where she used to sit for hours watching the world outside. Soon, this room would belong to Margaret, and Catherine would belong to William Ashford. She walked to her own mirror, smaller and simpler than the ornate one downstairs, and looked at her reflection honestly. Who was Catherine Montgomery? She realized with dawning horror that she didn't know. She had spent her entire life being molded into what others expected: a dutiful daughter, a gracious hostess, a perfect bride. But who was she beneath all those expectations? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Catherine?" It was Margaret's voice. "May I come in?" "Yes." Margaret entered, closing the door behind her. She looked at her sister with concern. "Are you all right? You seemed so sad downstairs." Catherine wanted to lie, to reassure her younger sister the way she had reassured everyone else. But looking at Margaret's innocent, trusting face, she couldn't bring herself to do it. "Margaret," she said carefully, "what do you want from your life?" Margaret looked surprised by the question. "I suppose I want what every girl wants. A good marriage, a family, a comfortable home. But what if you could choose? What if you could be anything, do anything?" Margaret laughed nervously. "That's not how the world works, Catherine. We're women. We don't get to choose." The simple truth of that statement hit Catherine like a physical blow. Margaret was right. In 1889, women of their class had no vote, no legal standing, no control over their own lives. They went from their father's house to their husband's house, from one form of ownership to another. "I know," Catherine said quietly. "I just wondered if you ever thought about it." "Sometimes," Margaret admitted. "But then I remember Mother's words. A woman's duty is to her family, not to her own foolish dreams." "Are you having doubts about William?" Catherine chose her words carefully. "Do you remember at the dinner party, when the servant spilled the wine near him?" Margaret nodded. "What about it? Did you see his face? How angry he became." "Men don't like incompetence, Catherine. Father is the same way with his employees. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it?" Margaret took her sister's hand. "Catherine, every bride gets nervous. But William is a good match. He's wealthy, respected, from an excellent family. You're lucky. Many women would trade places with you in an instant." But another word that felt like a lie. After Margaret left, Catherine remained alone with her thoughts. Through her window, she could see Boston Common in the distance, where ordinary people walked freely, their lives perhaps harder but their choices their own. She thought about the portrait that had just been taken, how it would hang in the Ashford family gallery, a testament to a marriage that hadn't even happened yet. The bride smiles, she thought bitterly. But what does the reflection show? What secrets hide behind the perfect surface? 3 more days. 3 more days until she walked down the aisle of Trinity Church. 3 more days until she became the property of William Bradford Ashford. 3 more days until the cage door closed forever. She looked down at her hands, soft and manicured, hands that had never worked, never fought, never made their own way in the world. These hands would sign the marriage register. These hands would belong to someone else. The October sun was setting, casting long shadows across her room. Soon it would be dark. Soon it would be time for dinner, where she would sit with her family and pretend everything was perfect. She would smile and nod and play the role expected of her. But inside, in a place no one could see, Catherine Montgomery was drowning in despair, trapped in a portrait of perfection that concealed a tragedy waiting to unfold. The morning of October 12th dawned gray and cold, with a harsh wind blowing in from the Atlantic that rattled the windows of the Montgomery estate. Catherine woke early, having barely slept, and lay in bed listening to the sounds of the household stirring to life. The servants were already at work, preparing for another day of wedding arrangements. In 2 days she would be married. She forced herself out of bed and dressed in a simple day gown with Martha's help. Today, she was required to have tea at the Ashford estate with William's mother, Constance Ashford, to discuss the household management she would assume after the wedding. The carriage ride to Cambridge seemed to last forever and no time at all. Catherine watched the city pass by through the window, the bustling shops on Tremont Street, the vendors selling roasted chestnuts on corners, the working women in their plain dresses hurrying to factories and offices. She envied them their purpose, even if their lives were harder than hers would ever be. The Ashford estate was even grander than the Montgomery home, a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion set on 5 acres of manicured grounds. It had been in the Ashford family for 3 generations, built by William's grandfather who had made his fortune in shipping and textiles. The house seemed to emanate old money and older expectations. A butler answered the door and led Catherine through hallways lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors, all staring down with stern expressions. She recognized William in their faces, the same pale blue eyes, the same thin lips, the same air of unquestionable authority. Constance Ashford waited in the morning room, a bright space overlooking the gardens. She was 62 years old, tall and elegant, with silver hair arranged in perfect waves and a face that might have been beautiful if not for its perpetual expression of disapproval. She wore black silk, still in mourning for her husband who had died 2 years earlier. "Catherine," she said, not rising. "You're punctual. That's good. William values punctuality." "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," Catherine said, sitting down as indicated. A servant poured tea from a silver service. Constance watched Catherine with the same appraising look Eleanor often gave her, as if assessing merchandise. "I trust your mother has been educating you on your duties as William's wife," Constance began. "The Ashford family has certain standards that must be maintained." "Yes, ma'am. William's first priority is the business. The shipping company requires constant attention. You will need to manage the household independently, entertain his business associates, and maintain our position in society. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Constance sipped her tea delicately. "I'll be frank with you, Catherine. William was married once before." Catherine's teacup rattled against its saucer. I didn't know. Few people do. It was 8 years ago. He was 27, she was 19. A girl from Philadelphia, from a respectable family. The marriage lasted only 6 months before she..." Constance paused, choosing her words carefully. "Before she had a nervous breakdown and had to be sent to an institution." Catherine felt her blood run cold. "What happened?" "These things happen sometimes with young women," Constance said dismissively. She was weak, unable to handle the responsibilities of being an Ashford wife. The marriage was quietly annulled on the grounds of her mental incapacity. She remains in a private sanitarium in upstate New York, supported by her family. But what caused her breakdown? Constance's eyes hardened. "That is not a topic for discussion. I tell you this only so you understand the importance of being strong. The Ashford family cannot afford another scandal. William needs a wife with fortitude, someone who won't crumble under pressure. Catherine's hands were shaking now. She set down her teacup before she dropped it. Mrs. Ashford, may I ask you something directly? You may ask. What kind of man is your son? The question hung in the air between them. Constance's face betrayed nothing, but Catherine saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it warning? Pity? Fear? William is a product of his upbringing, Constance said finally. His father was a demanding man who expected perfection. William learned young that weakness is not tolerated. He can be exacting, but he is also successful, wealthy, and from one of Boston's finest families. You would do well to remember that. And his first wife? Was she happy? Happiness, Constance said coldly, is a luxury, not a requirement. Now, let me show you the household accounts you'll be managing. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing ledgers, staff schedules, and the endless social obligations of an Ashford wife. Catherine tried to focus, but her mind kept returning to William's first wife, a nameless girl who had been broken by only 6 months of marriage. When the meeting finally ended, Catherine asked if she might use the washroom before leaving. Constance directed a servant to show her the way. But instead of going directly to the washroom, Catherine found herself wandering down a hallway she hadn't seen before. The hallway was darker than the rest of the house, lined with closed doors. She heard voices coming from one of the rooms and recognized William's voice. He was speaking to someone, his tone sharp and angry. I don't care what it costs. Fire him and hire someone competent. I won't tolerate incompetence in my employ. A softer voice, male, responded. Yes, sir. But Mr. Patterson has been with the company for 20 years. I don't care if he's been here 50 years. He made a mistake, and mistakes are unacceptable. Fire him today. Let it serve as an example to the others. Catherine backed away from the door, her heart pounding. She hurried to the washroom, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to calm her breathing. When she emerged, a servant was waiting to escort her back to the front entrance where her carriage waited. As she was about to leave, William appeared. He was dressed impeccably in a dark suit, his blonde hair slicked back, his pale eyes assessing her with the same coolness his mother had shown. Catherine, he said, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that should have been romantic but felt mechanical. I heard you were here. I apologize for not greeting you earlier. Business matters. Of course, Catherine managed to say. You look pale. Are you feeling well? I'm fine. Just tired from all the preparations. William's grip on her hand tightened slightly. You're not having doubts, are you? Because we've come too far for doubts. The invitations have been sent, the arrangements made. Our families have committed to this union. It was not a question but a warning. No doubts, Catherine lied, and she saw his expression relax. Good. In 2 days you'll be my wife. I'll expect you to be a credit to the Ashford name. My mother tells me she discussed my previous marriage with you. Yes. Then you understand what I require. Strength. Obedience. Discretion. Can you provide those things, Catherine? The way he said it made it clear there was only one acceptable answer. Yes. Excellent. He released her hand. I'll see you at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow evening. The carriage ride home was a blur. Catherine's mind was racing, trying to piece together what she had learned. William's first wife, driven to madness in 6 months. His mother's warning disguised as advice. The cold calculation in William's eyes when he spoke of obedience and discretion. She thought about that photograph taken yesterday, her smiling face frozen in time. What would people see when they looked at it in years to come? Would they see the truth hidden in the reflection, or would they only see what they wanted to see? A beautiful bride on the happiest day of her life? When she arrived home, she found her father in his study. She knocked tentatively. Come in, he called. Thomas Montgomery was reviewing contracts, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up when Catherine entered, and for a moment, she saw something in his face that might have been affection. Catherine, how was your meeting with Constance Ashford? She stood in the doorway, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. Father, I need to speak with you about the wedding. His expression shifted immediately from warmth to wariness. What about it? I have concerns about William, about his character. I learned today that he was married before and his wife. I know about his previous marriage, her father interrupted. The girl was mentally unstable. It had nothing to do with William. But father, what if? What if nothing? Thomas set down his pen, his voice hardening. Catherine, do you have any idea how much this wedding is costing? How many business arrangements depend on this alliance between our families? The contracts I've signed, the investments I've made. I understand, but... No, you don't understand. He stood, walking around the desk to face her. You live in this house, wear fine clothes, eat fine food, all provided by me. You have no concept of what it takes to maintain our position in society. This marriage is not just about you. It's about our entire family's future. But if I'm unhappy... Unhappy? Her father's laugh was harsh. Do you think your mother and I married for happiness? Do you think any of our friends did? Marriage is a contract, Catherine. You provide a respectable home and produce heirs. He provides financial security and social standing. That's how the world works. His first wife is in a sanitarium, Catherine said desperately. Doesn't that concern you? What concerns me, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, is my daughter throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime because of some romantic nonsense. You will marry William Ashford in 2 days. You will smile, you will be gracious, and you will do your duty to this family. Am I understood? Catherine felt tears burning her eyes but refused to let them fall. Yes, father. Good. Now go to your room. You're being hysterical just as I feared. Women's nerves before marriage. It will pass. Catherine fled to her room, closing the door behind her. She sank onto her bed, her whole body shaking. She had tried. She had spoken up. But no one would listen. No one cared about her fears, her concerns, her future happiness. She was a commodity to be traded, a piece in her father's business dealings. Margaret found her there an hour later, tears finally falling. Catherine? What's wrong? Margaret sat beside her, taking her hand. I can't marry him, Margaret. I can't. But what happened? Catherine told her everything. The first wife in the sanitarium, William's cold demeanor, the overheard conversation, Constance's warnings. Margaret listened, her young face growing more troubled with each revelation. You have to tell mother and father, Margaret said when Catherine finished. Tried. Father won't listen. He says it's all business arrangements and contracts. Mother would say the same thing. Then what will you do? That was the question that had been haunting Catherine all day. What could she do? She had no money of her own. No profession. No skills to support herself. If she refused to marry William, her father would disown her. She would have nothing and no one. I don't know, she whispered. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff and everyone is pushing me off. Margaret squeezed her hand. Maybe it won't be as bad as you fear. Maybe once you're married, William will be kinder. People can change. But even Margaret didn't sound convinced by her own words. That night, Catherine lay awake listening to the wind howl outside her window. She thought about William's first wife, alone in some institution, her mind broken by something Catherine could only imagine. She thought about the photograph, her smiling face captured forever, a lie preserved in silver and paper. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. The next day was the wedding. Time was running out, and she could see no escape from the future rushing toward her like a train. She was trapped in a portrait of perfection, and the reflection in the mirror revealed a truth no one wanted to see. She was being sacrificed on the altar of her family's ambitions, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Montgomery estate, a lavish affair with 50 guests including the most prominent families of Boston society. The dining room glittered with candlelight reflecting off crystal and silver. Catherine wore a gown of deep emerald silk, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that took Martha 2 hours to complete. She looked every inch the perfect bride, and she felt like an actress playing a role in a production she couldn't escape. William sat beside her at the head table, playing the part of the attentive fiancé. He made jokes that the guests laughed at, complimented Catherine in ways that sounded rehearsed, and touched her hand occasionally with possessive familiarity. To everyone watching, they appeared to be a couple deeply in love. But Catherine felt his hand on hers like a manacle. She noticed how his grip tightened whenever she spoke without being addressed first, how his smile never quite reached his cold blue eyes, how he watched her constantly as if assessing her performance. "Tomorrow," William whispered to her during a lull in the conversation, "you'll be Mrs. Ashford. Everything you are will belong to me. Your name, your property, your very existence. Are you prepared for that?" It was said quietly enough that no one else heard, but the menace in his tone made Catherine's blood run cold. "Yes," she managed to say, because what else could she say surrounded by 50 witnesses to their supposedly perfect union? The dinner dragged on for hours. Course after course was served while speeches were made toasting the happy couple. Catherine's father spoke about the joining of two great families. Constance Ashford spoke about the continuation of the Ashford legacy. Everyone spoke about everything except love, except happiness, except Catherine's own wishes. Finally, mercifully, the evening ended. The guests departed into the cold October night. William kissed Catherine's hand one final time. "Tomorrow," he said, and it sounded like a threat. After everyone left, Catherine helped the servants clear tables, needing something to do with her trembling hands. Eleanor scolded her for unladylike behavior, but Catherine couldn't sit still. She felt like she was vibrating with unexpressed terror. "Catherine," Martha said quietly, cornering her in the hallway away from the other servants. "I need to speak with you. Privately." They slipped into the library, closing the door. Martha's weathered face was creased with worry. "I wasn't going to say anything," Martha began, her hands twisting nervously. "It's not my place. But I can't watch you walk into that marriage without telling you what I know." "What do you know?" Catherine asked, her heart pounding. "I have a sister who works as a nurse at the Whitefield Sanitarium in upstate New York. 3 years ago, a patient arrived there, a young woman barely 20 years old. Her family had committed her after a nervous breakdown. My sister tended to her." Catherine gripped the back of a chair. "William's first wife." Martha nodded. "Her name was Sarah. Sarah Winters. She was before marriage, Sarah Ashford after. My sister says the girl arrived at the sanitarium covered in bruises. Bruises on her arms, her back, her face. She barely spoke, just sat staring at walls. When she did speak, she repeated the same words over and over. I tried to be perfect. I tried to be perfect." Catherine felt bile rising in her throat. "Did your sister ask what happened?" The official story was that the girl had fallen downstairs multiple times, that she was clumsy in her mental state. But my sister has been a nurse for 20 years, Miss Catherine. She knows the difference between accident bruises and bruises from being struck. And there were other injuries too, ones I can't speak about to an unmarried lady, but ones that suggested. Martha's voice broke. Suggested violence of the worst kind. The room seemed to spin around Catherine. She sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Why didn't anyone do anything?" she whispered. "What could anyone do?" The girl had no proof, and even if she did, who would believe her over an Ashford? Her own family didn't believe her. They thought she was making up stories, that her mind was broken. It was easier to declare her insane and send her away than to confront the truth. The Ashfords paid well for their silence. "Is she still there? At the sanitarium?" Martha nodded sadly. "My sister says she's improved over the years, but she'll likely never leave. She has nowhere to go. Her family won't take her back, afraid of the scandal. She's been erased, Miss Catherine. It's as if she never existed." Catherine stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened garden. Tomorrow she would marry the man who had destroyed Sarah Winters. Tomorrow she would legally become his property, with no rights, no protection, no escape. "I have to tell my parents," she said. "Will they believe you?" Martha asked gently. Catherine thought about her father's warnings about hysterics and women's nerves. She thought about her mother's insistence that duty trumped happiness. She thought about the contracts signed, the money spent, the social expectations. "No," she admitted. "They won't." "Then what will you do?" It was the same question Margaret had asked, and Catherine still had no answer. She was a woman alone, with no resources, no power, no options. The wedding was tomorrow. The trap was set. The cage door was closing. "I don't know," Catherine whispered. "God help me, I don't know." Martha came to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My sister says Sarah's mind started to break on her wedding night. Whatever he did to her then set the pattern for everything that followed. She endured 6 months of hell before her parents finally noticed something was wrong and took her away. 6 months, Miss Catherine. And now she'll spend the rest of her life in that place, paying for the crime of marrying the wrong man." Catherine closed her eyes, and she could see it all clearly now, her future mapped out in Sarah's past. The violence that would start perhaps on the wedding night. The isolation as William cut her off from family and friends. The escalating abuse as she failed to meet his impossible standards of perfection. And finally, the choice between madness or death. "I won't become Sarah," Catherine said, her voice stronger now. "I won't let him destroy me." "Then you must leave," Martha said urgently. "Tonight. Before the wedding. It's your only chance." "Leave? Where would I go? I have no money, no." "I have a small amount saved," Martha interrupted. "Enough for a train ticket west, maybe enough for a few weeks' lodging. My cousin has a boarding house in Chicago. She could help you find work, maybe as a governess or shop girl. It wouldn't be the life you're used to, but it would be your life." Catherine turned to look at Martha, seeing the earnest concern in the older woman's face. Martha had known her since childhood, had sewn her clothes, fixed her hair, listened to her dreams. Now Martha was offering her freedom, or at least the chance to fight for it. "If I disappear," Catherine said slowly, "it will be a scandal. My family will be humiliated. They might lose everything. And if you marry William Ashford, you might lose your life," Martha countered. "Or your sanity. Or your soul. Is that a fair trade for your family's reputation?" Catherine thought about the photograph taken 2 days ago, her smiling face in that wedding dress. She thought about how people would see it and think they knew the truth. The perfect bride, the perfect match, the perfect lie. "I need time to think," Catherine said. "The wedding isn't until 2 o'clock tomorrow. That gives me..." She calculated quickly, 16 hours. "Don't wait too long," Martha warned. "Once you walk down that aisle, once you speak those vows, you'll be his. Legally, morally, in every way that matters. There will be no escape then." After Martha left, Catherine remained in the library, her mind racing. Could she really do it? Could she abandon everything she had ever known, her family, her home, her entire world, to run away into uncertainty? But what was the alternative? To marry William knowing what she now knew? To let him break her the way he had broken Sarah? To end her days in a sanitarium, her mind shattered, her life over? She thought about Sarah, trapped in that institution for years, paying the price for other people's ambitions and pride. Sarah had been erased, made invisible, her suffering dismissed as madness. How many other women had suffered similar fates, their stories untold, their pain unacknowledged? Catherine walked through the silent house, past the portraits of her ancestors, past the symbols of wealth and status that had been purchased with her future. She climbed the stairs to her room, where her wedding dress hung like a ghost in the corner, waiting for morning. She went to her dresser and opened her jewelry box. Inside were pieces that had belonged to her grandmother, small items of real value. She could sell them if she had to. She looked at her wardrobe, filled with dresses and gowns that would be impractical for a working woman but might be sold for train fare. Could she do this? Could she throw away everything for the chance at freedom? She thought about her mother's words, "A woman's duty is to her family, not to her own foolish dreams." She thought about her father's anger when she had tried to voice concerns. She thought about society's expectations, about the scandal her disappearance would cause, about the lives that would be disrupted. And then she thought about Sarah, and the decision became clear. She would not become another erased woman. She would not let her life be destroyed to preserve her family's reputation or satisfy their ambitions. She would not walk into that cage willingly. Catherine began to pack, moving quietly through her room, selecting only what she could carry in a small traveling bag. Practical dresses, sturdy shoes, her grandmother's jewelry, what little money she had saved from birthday gifts. She wrote a letter to Margaret, trying to explain her decision, making her promise not to make the same mistakes. As dawn approached, Catherine stood at her window watching the sky lighten. In a few hours, the house would wake and discover her gone. There would be chaos, anger, humiliation. The wedding guests would arrive to find no bride. William would be furious. Her parents would be devastated. But she would be free. Or at least, she would have the chance to try to be free. She looked one last time at the wedding dress hanging in the corner, the dress that represented everything she was supposed to be and everything she refused to become. Then she picked up her bag, slipped down the back stairs, and walked out into the cold October morning, leaving behind the portrait of perfection to seek the messy, uncertain, terrifying reality of a life that was truly her own. Martha was waiting for her at the servants' entrance, a heavy cloak draped over her arm and an envelope in her hand. $60, Martha said, pressing the envelope into Catherine's hand. It's everything I have, but it's yours. The morning train to Chicago leaves at 6. You have 40 minutes. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Martha, I can't take your savings. You can and you will, Martha said firmly. I'm an old woman with few needs. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. Now go before someone wakes. They embraced briefly, and then Catherine was moving through the pre-dawn streets of Boston, her bag clutched tightly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The city was just beginning to stir, milk wagons making deliveries, bakers lighting their ovens, factory workers trudging toward another day of labor. Catherine had never walked these streets alone before. She had always been in carriages, always accompanied, always protected. Now she was just another woman in the growing crowd, anonymous and vulnerable and free. She reached the train station with 10 minutes to spare. The ticket agent barely glanced at her as she purchased her ticket to Chicago with Martha's precious money. She boarded the train, found a seat by the window, and watched as Boston slowly began to disappear behind her. Only then did she allow herself to think about what she had done. Her family would wake in an hour. They would discover her missing. There would be panic, searches, accusations. The wedding guests would begin arriving by noon, expecting a ceremony that would never happen. William would be humiliated in front of Boston's elite. The Montgomery name would be dragged through scandal. And Catherine felt no guilt, only an overwhelming sense of relief. She had escaped. She had saved herself. Whatever came next, poverty, hardship, loneliness, it would be on her own terms. She would never have to smile while dying inside. She would never have to pretend that pain was love or that obedience was virtue. The train rolled westward through the Massachusetts countryside, leaving autumn in New England behind. Catherine watched the landscape change through her window, farms giving way to forests, forests giving way to rolling plains. She was traveling into unknown territory in every sense. In her bag, she carried a photograph, not the formal wedding portrait, but a smaller one taken years ago of her and Margaret as children, laughing in the garden. That photograph told a truer story, of a girl who had once been happy, who had once had dreams beyond duty and obligation. Days turned into weeks as Catherine established a new life in Chicago. Martha's cousin, a kind widow named Mrs. O'Brien, ran a modest boarding house near the stockyards. The neighborhood was rough, the work hard, but Catherine found employment as a governess for a merchant family who asked few questions about her past. She learned to manage on wages instead of allowances. She learned to do her own laundry, to budget for food, to navigate city streets without the protection of family name or wealth. It was exhausting, humbling, and liberating in ways she had never imagined. She wrote to Margaret once, a carefully worded letter that revealed nothing of her location but assured her sister she was safe. She never heard back. Perhaps her family had intercepted the letter, or perhaps Margaret was too angry to respond. Catherine mourned that loss but understood it. She had broken the rules, and there were consequences. 3 months after her escape, Catherine saw a small notice in a Boston newspaper that someone had left at the boarding house. William Bradford Ashford III had married Miss Louisa Cabot in a quiet ceremony. There was no mention of his previous engagement to Catherine Montgomery. It was as if she had been erased from history, just as Sarah Winters had been erased. But Catherine wasn't erased. She was alive, surviving, building a life that belonged to her alone. It wasn't the life she had been raised to expect. There were no servants, no social events, no leisurely afternoons. But it was real in a way her old life had never been. One cold December evening, as she walked home from her governess position, Catherine passed a photography studio. In the window was a display of wedding portraits, brides smiling at the camera, their futures bright with promise. She thought about her own wedding portrait, the one that had been taken but never used. She wondered what had happened to it. Had her parents destroyed it in anger? Had they kept it hidden away, a reminder of her betrayal? Or had they managed to explain away her disappearance, creating some socially acceptable fiction to preserve the family reputation? It didn't matter anymore. That portrait had captured a lie, a smiling bride hiding a desperate, terrified woman. But the reflection in that ornate mirror had told the truth to anyone willing to see it. The sadness in the eyes, the tension in the shoulders, the barely concealed despair, it had all been there, visible to anyone who looked closely enough. But no one had looked. Everyone had seen what they wanted to see, a perfect bride entering a perfect marriage. They had seen the surface and ignored the depths. They had celebrated the beautiful lie and dismissed the ugly truth. Catherine entered Mrs. O'Brien's boarding house, climbing the stairs to her small room on the 3rd floor. It was modest, just a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. But it was hers. Every item in it had been earned by her own labor. Every decision about how to arrange it, how to live in it, was hers to make. She sat at her small desk and pulled out paper and pen. For months, she had been writing, recording her story, not just her escape, but everything that had led to it. The pressure to marry well, the dismissal of her concerns, the system that treated women as property to be traded. She wrote about Sarah Winters, trapped in a sanitarium, her life stolen. She wrote about the portrait that had captured her false smile while revealing her true despair. She wasn't sure what she would do with these writings. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps they would simply remain a record of one woman's rebellion against a system designed to break her. But the act of writing itself was liberating, claiming her own narrative, telling her own truth. As spring arrived in Chicago, Catherine had been gone from Boston for 6 months. She had survived the winter, kept her employment, saved a small amount of money. Mrs. O'Brien had become a friend, someone who asked no questions about Catherine's past but supported her present. One evening, Mrs. O'Brien invited Catherine to join her for tea in the boarding house parlor. "There's something I want to give you," the older woman said, handing Catherine a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photograph in a simple frame. It showed Catherine on the day she had arrived at the boarding house, 6 months ago, exhausted, frightened, but determined. Mrs. O'Brien had taken it without Catherine's knowledge, using a small camera she kept for recording her tenants. "I thought you might like to have it," Mrs. O'Brien said, "to remember where you started." Catherine looked at the photograph and saw someone she barely recognized, a young woman on the edge of transformation, still carrying the shadows of her old life but stepping toward something new. Her expression wasn't a forced smile but something more complex, fear mixed with hope, despair mixed with determination. It was, Catherine realized, the most honest photograph ever taken of her. No elaborate dress, no perfect staging, no lies. Just truth, a woman choosing survival over society's expectations. "Thank you," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure this." That night, she placed the photograph on her dresser next to the old picture of her and Margaret. 2 images, 2 different lives. The past and the present. The lie and the truth. She thought about the wedding portrait that still existed somewhere, frozen in time. The bride who smiled while her reflection revealed despair. She thought about how that image would be interpreted by future viewers who knew nothing of the story behind it. They would see a beautiful bride and invent a happy ending.